On the Fringe with Dan RadioStyle. Hope everybody out there's having themselves a great day. Yesterday's press conference was a lot better than I initially thought it would be. For those of you that didn't catch it, he was called out of the press conference because of a shooting that occurred outside of the White House. We're going to cover some of those details. Also, a really awesome softball question that OAN posed. And what's really funny is Trump literally said, and OAN, you had a question, didn't you? So he literally teed them up, and they came back with a very pertinent question, I think, in the big picture. And it has to do with Biden and his vice president choice and whether he's going to be able to get himself out of trouble. That's amazing. So I've got that for us as well. And the last thing that I think is super key on this, I think Trump has blackmailed the deep state. And you're like, wait, what? How? There's been so much talk around the election, so much talk around voting by mail, and the fact that there's going to be problems with it if it continues in that path. We found out something with DACA that Trump has now used and weaponized, and he's using this to hold over the deep state. I'm going to be talking about that in just a moment. So let's get into the whole big spiel about what happened yesterday. This obviously is an image, well, not obviously, but it could be. The Secret Service telling Trump, hey, yeah, you probably want to get off the stage. We're going to play that live video. You're going to see exactly how that played out. But yeah, they walked the president right out of there. He was probably, 3 minutes into his speech, 2.5 minutes into his speech. They hear gunshots. They approach him and say, hey, Mr. President, we're going to pull you out of here. This isn't cool. Now, the shooting, supposedly there was a officer-involved shooting. Supposedly, the officer went to the hospital as well, but he might have been accompanying the actual person that was the criminal, I guess, or whatever we're going to call them. They apparently did have a weapon. There's a lot of things that we don't necessarily know yet. I think there's a little hush-hush. But there's a lot of interesting stuff around this. One, Trump talked about this presser saying, hey, check me out at 2:30. He tweeted about it. So I think there was some nervousness around the deep state. This possibly was an asset being used for a couple reasons. One, maybe to see what would actually happen. And two, maybe to see if they could get the presser to stop. Because that was one of the first questions that he got flooded with when he came back. And he did come back. One of the biggest things he got a bunch of questions for was, why did you come back? Aren't you scared for your life? Blah, blah, blah. We're going to play a couple minutes of that as well. Now, where did this occur? 17th Street and Pennsylvania Avenue. I wanted to give some context. I've never been in front of the White House, so I just needed to try to understand. This is the intersection that this happened at. And I want to say the police cars were over here in this area by this crosswalk, but this is the intersection for Pennsylvania and 17th. Now, for those of you that don't know, this is the entrance, I think, to get into the White House grounds or whatever. Now, this itself is not the White House, this building here. The White House is way over here, way over here. And in fact, let me give you some perspective. This is the intersection that I was just talking about, 17th and whatever the heck it is, right? It's right here, this little section in here. This right here is the Eisenhower office, executive office building. The White House is way down this street and then over here. So this guy was nowhere near the actual White House. But these, where he was shot, or where the ta-ta happened, it was a double shot, that's what the eyewitnesses were saying. Where this happened is quite far away from the White House, and as of course they've talked about, they've pushed these barricades back a little further. So that's where it occurred. Now let's get a little taste for how this kind of played out, and it'll give you a bit of a feel for what the president went through and what actually happened. It's craziness.
Thank you very much. I thought I'd start by talking about some mail-in voting that just was revealed, just the news. 500,000 incorrect absentee ballot applications were sent all across the state of Virginia, including to many dead people. This was an unprecedented mailing flub that's heightened concerns about the integrity of expanding mail-in voting and mail-in voting efforts. It's a disaster. All over Virginia, 500,000 votes. So that's something you have to think about. We don't want to have a rigged election. I know that. And you have to be very careful when you mention, as you constantly do, Russia, or you mention China, or you mention Iran, or others that attack our election system. And when you have this mail-in voting, it's very susceptible. It's something that can be easily attacked by foreign countries and by, frankly, Democrats and by Republicans. And I think that it's something you have to start thinking about very seriously. Our system's not equipped for it. The post office is not equipped for it. And people should vote like they did in World War I and World War II. And your numbers will be, in 90 days or less, your numbers will be very good, I think, much better on the coronavirus or the China virus. But it's something you have to look at and say, this is just crazy. This just came out, 500,000 incorrect ballot applications sent all over the state of Virginia to many people that weren't living. They had some sent to pets, dogs. This is what we're going to get into, and it's going to be a disaster. And it's going to be thought of very poorly. It's going to hurt our country. After our news conference Saturday night and the pro-growth announcement, we're pro-jobs, pro-health safety, executive orders, the stock market went up 358 points today. So we issued those executive orders, and the stock market went up 358 points today. It's quite a reaction. The Dow Jones and the S&P 500 are now up 50% since March. 50%. Think if you had money in there, if you put your money in March, you're 50%. The NASDAQ index continues to set new records. It's been up over 14 times, new record in NASDAQ. And the S&P 500 and the Dow Jones are going to be, I mean, the way they're going, it looks like they're just about going to be topping records hopefully soon. Excuse me?
And literally, that's all she wrote. He approaches, they heard shots outside, and right in the middle of his speech, literally, first off, if you think about just being interrupted while Trump is in the middle of the speech, that had to have been a little surprising for him. But the way he handled it, like at first he turns like he's going to say something, and I think he's just like, well, I can't, and he just leaves. And he just kind of got this, okay, I guess I'm leaving, no big deal. So the way that played out is pretty incredible. And we've also got kind of how he was when he came back. I want to play a little bit of that because I think this is important to point out as well. So let's see if I can get ourselves right back to the start of this because they basically interrupt.
Fantastic job, as you know. So it seems to me, it seems to be from what I was said, there was a shooting. It was law enforcement shot someone, seems to be the suspect, and the suspect is now on the way to the hospital. I can't tell you the condition of the suspect. There was nobody else injured. There was no other law enforcement injured. And I just want to, we'll get on to the press conference, but I do want to thank Secret Service. They are fantastic. The job they do. From what I understand, the answer is yes.
He was armed, Mr. President?
That's what I understand. I don't know. You'll have to ask them.
What type of weapon?
I don't know that, no.
Was it a male or a female
I
suspect?
don't know. You'll have to get, they'll have a detailed, maybe a briefing for you outside later.
Did they say anything against you personally?
I don't know. I didn't ask that question.
Was he
It might not have had anything to do with me. It might have been something else, but it was on the outside of the premises. The wall, as you know, the fencing, especially the new fencing that they put up, is very powerful. But it was on the outside of the White House. Okay, and they'll have a full report. Secret Service, in a little while, will have a full report.
Are you rattled by this at all, Mr. President?
I don't know. Do I seem rattled? It's unfortunate that this is a world, but the world's always been a dangerous place. It's not something that's unique. The world has been, you look back over the centuries, the world has been a dangerous place, very dangerous place, and it will continue, I guess, for a period of time.
Does this make you think differently about your personal...
I like how he handled the rattled question. He's like, do I seem rattled? I mean, he couldn't seem more calm to me. Whether he was, like a duck in the pond, just feet going a mile a minute underneath, maybe, but I don't think so. He looked very, very calm and collect. And his comment about the bad people in the world and how they'll be here for a period of time, I think that was, a hint at what's coming. And so there's some concerns and questions and talks about that as far as what did he mean around that. And I think this ties into the big picture. Again, part of this blackmail thing that we're going to get to in a moment. But I think Trump's kind of setting some stuff up and basically saying, look, you guys are screwed. The deep state's losing. They're losing power quick. They're losing the story. They even had this situation and tried desperately to get Trump off guard. And then he basically just went right back into the press conference that he was going to be doing, period. So again, some very interesting sides have come around on this. Now, there was a cool question, and I'm going to share this video here, a couple questions really, that were brought up. One was, who's messing with the election and how all that plays out? And I think Donald Trump's answer, one, was perfect, and two, really spun the focus back to where it belongs, which is towards the Democrats. Let's check it out.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. You just mentioned President Putin and the possibility of inviting him here because he's important. Your own Director of National Intelligence has said that Russia is currently planning or actually meddling in the election. Have you raised that directly with Putin ever?
They said China, Russia, Iran, and probably others. But because of the fake news, they seem to think Russia plays the best. So,
Yeah, no, it's not me.
So what they do, it's all right. Well, I'm just saying the way the politicians look. The other day, they said the three countries. They said China and Russia and Iran. And some reporter got up and said, Russia is meddling. I said, well, didn't it mention China and Iran? Why didn't you mention them, too? So I don't know. You know what I'm telling you? I'll tell you who's meddling in our elections. The Democrats are meddling by wanting and insisting on sending mail-in ballots with this corruption all over the place. If you check what happened in New York, a small, relatively small race with Carolyn Maloney, and they called her the winner the other day because I was mentioning it at conferences and getting a lot of action on that statement. So they called her, they declared her the winner, and they have no idea who won. And the person, her opponent, is very angry. But they had mail-in voting, and they had hundreds and I think even thousands of ballots that are missing, that were fraudulent. Take a look at the Carolyn Maloney race. Take a look at Paterson, New Jersey. Take a look now at this one in Virginia, where they mailed out 500,000 applications, and they go into people that aren't supposed to be getting an application.
So what's funny is initially when he started his whole presser, he right into the mail-in voting stuff, and he really started hammering it, talking about how they were sent all over the place, how there's even additional places now, not just the original two in New Jersey, New York, but there's additional cities now that are having all sorts of issues. And he even got into the New York, the way that's playing out and how the New York thing played out. It's not working out good for the scheme that mail-in voting is a good idea or safe. Now we've got an amazing, I want to call it a softball question, but essentially he teed up OAN and said, didn't you have a question for me? And they asked him an opinion question. And what's really funny is this opinion question really hits to the heart of Biden, who he chooses for vice president, whether or not the person he chooses can keep his campaign from getting investigated. And so let's see what Donald Trump had to say about that. It's actually a very cool answer.
Did you have one, OAN?
Mr. President.
OAN, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, thank you for coming back to finish the briefing.
Thank you very
after
much.
the scuffle. So I have an opinion question for you.
Okay.
Joe Biden is set to announce his running mate at any time now. We expect him to announce her. Many of your supporters feel that the reason that Obama's former NSA, Susan Rice, is at the top of Biden's list is that she can best cover up a lot of the Obamagate surveillance crimes that have taken place during your campaign. What are your thoughts? What is your opinion? Do you subscribe to that line of thought? How do you feel about it?
Well, look, the Obama campaign spied on our campaign, and they've been caught, all right? And now let's see what happens to them. But they have been caught. They've been caught red-handed. It's probably treason. It's a horrible thing they did. It probably never happened before. At least nobody got caught doing it. But they used the intelligence agencies of our country to spy on my campaign, and they have been caught. And there are a lot of people involved. I don't want to say how much she's involved. Frankly, if he chooses her, that's fine, but that's a potential liability. We'll see. But President Obama knew about it. Joe Biden knew about it. Comey knew about it. Brennan, Clapper, the whole group, they all knew about it. Lisa Page and her lover Strzok, they all knew about it. And we have it documented. We have it in texts. We have it in all sorts of forms. They knew about it. It was a terrible thing. Should have never happened and should never be allowed to happen again to a president. This should never happen again. This was a setup like we've never seen. I think it's the political crime of the century. And they've been caught. So let's see what happens to them all. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Literally the last question he takes. I love the automatic cameras, man. It just sounds like one of those guys is like going crazy on them. But again, one of the big things that he's pointing out is they thought that there was going to be this security for Biden and anybody that runs with, because if you're running for president, they can't necessarily try to investigate you. It was partially why they say, anyway, the theory, that there were so many people running for the Democratic presidential nomination because while they were running, they felt they couldn't be investigated. Now, as it's turned out, investigations have continued to move forward, and no big deal. Now, as far as directly investigating Biden, yeah, sure, he probably legally can't, but that doesn't matter. All he has to do is continue down the path of investigating Obama or anybody that was tied in around that whole campaign, and that automatically kind of makes Biden guilty. And on top of that, we've got ample evidence around Burisma and all the stuff that was happening in the Ukraine. And certainly there's a lot of evidence to suggest that China has been buying some favors from the Biden family as well. So a lot of things are not playing out well for that individual. Now, one thing that kind of got brought up, and this is just sort of an aside, but it's cool, is he mentioned this guy, Scott Atlas. None of the stuff I just played right now had this, and I didn't think it was worth playing it. But who this guy is, and he kind of makes a big deal about how smart he is and all that. This has to do, I think, with Trump really going after replacing the Obamacare. Because this guy is really high up in the food chain when it comes to the hospitals, and he's really into MRIs with the brain and all this different stuff. So this guy's like major doctor. He's been supporting a lot of the presidential elections for a long time. So this guy's written all sorts of books. So anyway, he's supposedly being brought in to help with, I think, the health care. At first, when I heard the name and heard him plug him, I thought maybe it had to do with replacing Fauci. I don't think that's the case, just in case any of you out there were wondering. Now, the blackmail thing, which I'm sure all of you are like, dude, seriously, you should have started with that. Well, come on now, let's be fair. So what happened with DACA? Let's take a little trip down the DACA lane. So DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, was seen as a huge political loss for President Trump. And just to kind of remind you guys, President Trump tried to use an executive order to stop DACA. And essentially, the Supreme Court came back and said, it's not that you tried to do something, there's just a way that you can do it, and the way you tried to do it, you can't. Now, loosely translated and some other researching into this, and you'll find that essentially what they said is, you cannot use an executive order to overturn an executive order. DACA was an executive order. Trump cannot use an executive order to overturn an executive order. Now, some of you might already be on top of what the blackmail was. Some of you might still be going, okay, and, well, what happened on Friday of last week? Trump did an executive order to remove the payroll tax, the taxes for Social Security from payroll. He did an executive order that says we are no longer going to be pulling these taxes out. It's an executive order. If he doesn't get voted back into office, and he said he would release this when the time was right, if he doesn't get reelected back in office, on the books sits an executive order that removes and stops forever the tax that we have on our payroll for Social Security. Now, I don't know how they expect to fund Social Security. I think anybody that's been in this conspiracy game long enough would pretty much assumes that the Social Security money is probably already dipped into, probably for the most part, is spent inappropriately. So that now dries up another source of funding. Now, obviously, they're going to keep paying people Social Security money. They're not going to stop doing that. How? I don't know. But Trump passed an executive order, and a few others for that matter, that will stay on the books until he either changes it or you've got to go through this huge voting process to do it. Again, he could end DACA, but it requires Congress. and it requires Congress to get along. And until everybody's on the same page in Congress, meaning the House and the Senate are pretty much run by the same group of people, there's almost no way you're going to be able to get something like that through Congress. And the same is going to go for the Social Security. Now, it could, maybe after Trump gets taken out of office, maybe they somehow magically win back everything and are able to change it. But right now, Trump basically just put his thumb down on the scale and said, here's what's up. You guys cheat. You guys try to do anything with this mail-in voting, try to do any of this stuff, or I'm leaving this, removing the taxes on the books. You guys aren't going to have Social Security. Your FICA's gone. So he has put some very, very serious pressure on the deep state. And so again, how this is playing out, we're going to see. How the election plays out, we're going to see. There's a lot of talk about how messed up the mail-in voting's going. That's going to continue to get pushed, and more evidence will come forth. And again, his life is at risk, and you can see that even they tested the defenses at the White House, and trust me, the White House has crazy defenses around it. It's not just a fence and a couple dudes with guns. It's way more than that. So anybody that tries to make this decision to storm the White House, it's not going to end well for the people that try to storm the White House. I am reasonably sure they could support a small army invasion in that building, not to mention the bunker and everything else. There's just no way it's going to happen. So a lot of people are talking tough. Trump's actually putting his foot down and is being tough. And so a lot of things are going to start to get even more and more interesting as time continues. Keep staying with us. We're going to keep trying to bring you information as it comes forward. Where we go one, we go all. It's on the Fringe with Dan RadioStyle.